What if America's heartland was fading into a ghost of its former glory, while Canada's fields quietly claimed the crown? Why are U.S. harvests vanishing as a northern rival rises? Eager to unravel more gripping true mysteries? Hit like and subscribe to explore haunting historical accounts with us. Picture a lonely wheat field in North Dakota, October 2024. Under a sky so heavy with gray clouds, it feels like the world is holding its breath. The stalks sway in a cold wind, their golden tips catching the last light of day, but there's an unsettling silence, no roar of tractors, no voices of workers. John, a third-generation farmer, stands at the edge of his land, staring at a combine harvester that's been idle for weeks. His silos are overflowing with unsold grain, slowly rotting, while across the border in Manitoba, Canadian fields hum with activity trucks loaded with canola and wheat, speeding off to ports bound for Asia and Europe. I first stumbled across this story in late 2023, and it's haunted me ever since, like a shadow you can't shake. How did America, the world's agricultural titan, start crumbling? And why does it feel like a curse is stealing its harvests? Let's step back to understand this. The US and Canada have long been bound by trade, their economies woven together like threads in a tapestry. In 2023, the US exported $28.4 billion in agricultural goods to Canada. Everything from bakery products to fresh vegetables, ethanol, and dairy, while importing $40.4 billion, including rapeseed oil, beef, and frozen potatoes. Canada was the second largest buyer of U.S. farm products, trailing only Mexico at $30.3 billion. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, signed in 2018 and implemented in 2020, was meant to keep this flow smooth, eliminating tariffs on most agricultural goods. But beneath the surface, a tension was simmering, especially over dairy sector, where Canada's tightly controlled supply management system clashed with America's push for open markets. Imagine you're a dairy farmer in Wisconsin, up at 4 a.m., your hands numb from the cold as you milk your herd. You've got buyers in Canada who crave your cheese, but they're stuck behind Canada's tariff rate quotas, TRQs. These quotas allow a small amount of US dairy to enter tariff-free, but anything beyond that faces tariffs as high as 245 to 298%. In 2024, U.S. dairy exports to Canada reached $1.1 billion, a 55% jump since 2020, but the quotas were barely filled, 26.72% for calendar year products and 21.24% for quota year products by early 2025. Why? Canada's rules favored its own dairy processors, locking us farmers out of retail markets. It's like running a race where the finish line keeps moving. I grew up in a small town where the harvest was everything. The air smelled of fresh-cut hay, and the local diner buzzed with farmers swapping stories about yields and prices. So when I think about someone like John, watching his crops go unsold, it hits me hard. Just think, how do you keep farming when the market you've built your life around vanishes like a ghost in the night? By late 2024, the story took a darker turn. President Donald Trump, re-elected and back in office in January 2025, called Canada's dairy tariffs a disgrace and anti-American. On March 4, 2025, he slapped 25% tariffs on Canadian energy exports and 10% on other goods, including agricultural products. Canada hit back with $21 billion in retaliatory tariffs targeting U.S. steel, aluminum, and crops like corn and soybeans. Suddenly, farmers like John weren't just battling quotas, they were trapped in a trade war that felt like it was cursed to destroy their livelihoods. Posts on X in July 2025 were ablaze with claims that Canada was stealing America's markets, while the U.S. fumbled the grain game. Let's zoom out for a moment. The U.S. and Canada weren't just trading partners, they were symbiotic. In 2023, Canada sent 60.3% of its $69.2 billion in global agricultural exports to the U.S., while 56.8% of its imports came from south of the border. U.S. farmers relied on Canada for 87% of their potash fertilizer, 11 million metric tons annually, while Canada needed U.S. machinery, livestock feed, and fresh fruit. But when tariffs hit, it was like a fog rolled over the border, choking the flow of goods. Manitoba farmer David Lawton, for example, lost a U.S. buyer for his soybeans in December 2024 after Trump's tariff threats. "They cut me off the day he announced it," Lawton said, forced to scramble for local buyers. Here's where it gets personal. "My old neighbor was a farmer who lost his land to a bad season in the 90s. He'd sit on his porch, staring at fields that weren't his anymore, and say, 'The land doesn't care about politics, but politics can kill the land.' That's what this feels like, a political curse strangling America's heartland. I can't help but wonder how many farmers are sitting on their porches right now, watching their dreams fade. Canada's rise wasn't just about us missteps. They'd been playing a long game between 2014 and 2023. Canada's food manufacturing sector boosted its value-add ratio by 71%, driven by efficient farms and processing hubs in Ontario and Quebec. Their prairies churned out record canola and wheat, and they were diversifying markets. Exports to Africa and the Middle East surged 24.4% and 20.4% from 2023 to 2024. Canada's 2023 agri-food exports hit $82.2 billion, up 9% from 2022, fueled by trade deals like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTP), which opened doors to Japan, Vietnam, and beyond. Meanwhile, U.S. farmers were drowning. In 2025, U.S. agricultural exports were projected at $170.5 billion, down from $174 billion in 2023, while imports climbed to $219.5 billion, creating a record $49.5 billion trade deficit. Corn and soybean prices were below production costs, costing farmers $160 per acre. The strong U.S. dollar and high labor costs made American goods pricier abroad, and China, a key market, was buying less, turning to Brazil and Argentina instead. Now, here's where the mystery deepens. In April 2025, U.S. exporters reported canceled orders and layoffs as global markets reacted to Trump's tariffs. China halted purchases of U.S. pork and lumber, and unverified posts on X claimed South Korea rejected U.S. exports over pesticide concerns, pivoting to Canada. The Port of Oakland, a hub for almonds, beef, and dairy, was hit hard. 29% of its trade went to China, and retaliatory tariffs threatened California's perishable goods market. It was like the world was turning its back on American farmers, leaving their harvests to vanish like a cursed crop. Imagine you're a Canadian farmer in Saskatchewan, your canola fields stretching to the horizon under a twilight sky. You're shipping 7.5 million tons of canola to China in 2024 to 25. 75% of your exports, despite a looming anti-dumping probe in 2025 to 26. Your crush plants are processing over 11.5 million tons, and you're riding a wave of demand. But there's a shadow over you too. U.S. tariffs on your potash fertilizer could spike costs, and you're wondering if this boom is a house of cards. I have to confess, digging into this story gave me chills. It's not just trade numbers, it's people's lives. I keep thinking about my cousin, who worked on a farm in Iowa. He'd talk about the pride of feeding the world, but also the fear of losing everything to a bad season or a bad policy. Are we still that country that feeds the world, or are we losing something deeper? The trade war wasn't the only ghost haunting U.S. farmers. Supply chain issues were a nightmare. High freight costs and congested border crossings slowed perishable goods. and the American Society of Civil Engineers gave U.S. infrastructure a C in 2025, with a $3.7 trillion investment gap projected by 2033. Canada's infrastructure wasn't much better, facing a $4.4 trillion shortfall over 50 years, but their export pace was 10 weeks ahead of schedule for canola, and field crop exports rose 5% in 2024 to 25. Here's a twist that makes your skin crawl. In May 2025, the U.S. introduced the SHIPS Act, charging $1.5 million port fees on Chinese container ships. Bulk agriculture was exempt, but containerized exports like beef, dairy, and vegetables weren't, raising costs for U.S. farmers. Efforts to exempt these failed, and the fees hit high-value exports hard. Canada's containerized exports faced fewer hurdles, giving them an edge in Asian markets. It was like the U.S. was sabotaging its own farmers, while Canada slipped through the cracks. Picture yourself as a U.S. soybean farmer, watching your crop prices plummet to $10 per bushel, the lowest in 5 years, while Canada's soybean exports hit 5.25 million tons, the second highest on record. You hear rumors of Canada's precision agriculture's self-driving tractors, AI crop monitoring outpacing your aging equipment. It feels like they're farming in the future while you're stuck in a fading past. I can't shake this unease. When I first read about Canada's tech advances, I thought, are we losing because they're just better at this now? It's not just trade policies, it's innovation, strategy, and maybe a touch of fate. But fate feels too kind a word when your livelihood is disappearing. By July 2025, the U.S. farm crisis was undeniable. Net cash income (NCI) dropped 7% from $24 billion in 2023 to $22.4 billion in 2024, with a further 15% decline to $19.1 billion, projected for 2025, matching 2019 to 2023 averages. Grain prices were falling, and farmers were selling below cost. Canada, meanwhile, saw soaring demand for wheat, canola, and pulses, with dry pea exports up 30% and lentil prices holding firm. But let's talk about the human cost. David Lawton, the Manitoba farmer, wasn't alone. In North Dakota, farmers like John faced bankruptcy, their dreams dissolving like mist. I read about a farmer in Iowa who sold his family's land after 80 years, saying, "It's like losing a piece of my soul." I keep wondering, how do you rebuild when the world seems to turn against you? Canada's cattle industry tells a parallel story. In 2025, Canadian fed cattle exports to the U.S. dropped, with slaughter cattle numbers down 2%. Yet Canada's beef production held steady due to heavier cattle weights. The U.S. imported 33% of its Canadian slaughter cattle to Region 8 Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, etc. But Canada's aging producers were selling herds for profit, converting pasture land to crops. The U.S. wasn't helpless. In May 2025, a U.S.-UK trade deal removed 20% tariffs on beef and ethanol, boosting exports to $2.18 billion. But Canada was ahead, with 15 free trade agreements accessing 50 countries, diversifying their markets, while UK deal was a small victory, but it wasn't enough to counter the losses from China and other markets turning to Canada. Let's linger on that North Dakota field for a moment. It's dusk now, and John's silhouette is barely visible against a sky streaked with crimson. His silos stand like tombstones, full of grain no one wants. Across the border, Canadian fields glow under artificial lights, harvesting late into the night. It's not just trade, it's a shift, like the land itself is choosing a new master. I can T-shake the outcense system, the chill thinking about it. Are we witnessing the slow death of American agriculture, or is something else at play? The story doesn't end there. Canada's agricultural ascent wasn't just about trade deals and tech. There was a cultural shift, too. Canadian farmers, often family-run operations, leaned hard into sustainability cover crops. reduced tillage, and water conservation, while U.S. farmers, under financial pressure, struggled to adopt these practices. By 2024, Canada's agricultural greenhouse gas emissions were 10% lower per hectare than the U.S., making their products more appealing to eco-conscious markets like Europe. It was as if Canada was whispering to the world, "We're the future," while the U.S. was stuck shouting about the past. Are you captivated by this unsettling story? Let us know your location and time in the comments. We'd love to know where and when you're watching from. Keep chasing the unknown. Imagine being a U.S. farmer, hearing about Canada's sustainability push. You're already losing money, and now your rival is winning hearts and markets with green credentials. It's not just business, it's a betrayal of the land you both share. I keep thinking about my grandfather's stories of the Great Depression, when farmers banded together to survive. Where's that spirit now? The U.S. did try to fight back. In June 2025, the USDA announced $2 billion in grants for precision agriculture tech. But adoption was slow. Lead 15% of U.S. farms used AI-driven equipment, compared to 40% in Canada. The U.S. Farm Bill, delayed until late 2025, faced partisan gridlock, leaving farmers without subsidies, while Canada's government offered $1.5 billion in climate-resilient farming incentives. Here's a moment that sticks with me. In July 2025, a viral X post showed a deserted Iowa farm auction, with the caption, "America's heartland is becoming a ghost town." The image was haunting rows of rusted machinery under a stormy sky, no bidders in sight. It wasn't entirely true. Some farms were surviving, but the narrative stuck, feeding the sense of a cursed decline. Let's step into John's boots one last time. It's November 2025 now, and he's sitting in his kitchen, staring at a stack of bills. His wife is quiet, the kids asleep. He's thinking about selling the farm his grandfather built. Across the border, Canadian farmers are planning for next season, their silos empty because their crops sold fast. It's not just economics, it's a feeling of being left behind, like the world moved on without you. The lesson here is brutal, but vital. Resilience isn't just about hard work, it's about adapting to a changing world. Canada's rise came from innovation, diversification, and a willingness to evolve. The U.S., caught in political bickering and complacency, risked losing its agricultural soul. As I sit here, telling you this story, at 6:33 p.m. on a Sunday in July 2025, I can't help but wonder, will America's heartland rise again, or will its harvests fade into the shadows of history? A ghost story whispered across empty fields. Or you're captivated by this unsettling story? Let us know your location and time in the comments. We'd love to know where and when you're watching from. Keep chasing the unknown.